complicated, you know, man. Like a damn Rubik's Cube, man. Like talking about blue, red, man. Then you get to one side, and like messed up.
All right, Thomas. Welcome back to the Jay Burden Show. How you doing?
Very well. Thanks for hosting me.
Yeah, so normally I kind of enjoy our one-off series where we sort of answer a question, normally a question that I have. And this is based off of a post you made on Twitter a while back.
Like the Tootsie Roll L.
Yeah, exactly.
1, 2, 3. 3. I'm in a weird fucking mood. Pay no attention. Go ahead.
Oh, no worries. And it's based off a post you made basically advocating that most people should set up a trust. And your point with that is that, you know, the probate process where essentially your assets are, you know, released to your family after death is a giant circus, you know, something that should be avoided at all cost. And so I have worked in the industry. You know, I have friends who've worked in industries adjacent to this. And so I have a similar perspective. And so I thought that would be an interesting place to jump off into a conversation about money and wealth and kind of the purpose of wealth from one generation to another. So do you want to kind of explain, you know, your background and kind of how you came to this this belief about, you know, wills versus trusts? And actually, you know what, I'm realizing you and I know what these words mean, but it may be a good idea to define what a trust is, because this is something that, you know, is kind of a technical term, I guess.
Well, I got interested in testamentary instruments. I mean, when I was in law school, I never had any interest in that practice area per se, but obviously it's important. It's something that people don't like to think about because nobody likes to think about their own death. And, you know, it's just like an uncomfortable topic, you know, on its own terms. So as I kind of started researching it more and more, you know, I realized there's kind of a staggering number of people who die, you know, intestate without any kind of testamentary instrument in place. The issue with a will is that, you know, a will immediately goes to probate when the decedent passes away, and the court, you know, interprets intent and everything else, you know, and an appointed representative, you know, essentially, you know, decides, you know, how the estate is going to be apportioned among the stakeholders. You can completely avoid that process by establishing a testamentary trust, which becomes operative, you know, the moment that, you know, the decedent dies, and, you know, the beneficiary then, you know, immediately receives the principal. And especially if you're a guy who doesn't have, you know, some kind of, you know, super complicated estate, or doesn't, you know, have, you know, a huge amount of wealth that, you know, it's not practicable, frankly, you know, to transfer it upon death, you know, through a testamentary trust, just because the process would be overwhelming or something. I still don't think a conventional will is the way to go in those circumstances, but for the vast majority of people, you know, it's very, very easy to execute a testamentary trust that completely keeps, I mean, they won't keep the IRS's grubby hands off the principal, because like nothing will, obviously, but it keeps the court out of it. It makes it, it's a very, and it's basically ironclad. It's virtually impossible unless there's some kind of duress wherein the testator, you know, was forced to execute the instrument or something like that. There's virtually no grounds by which it can be challenged. You know, so if you have crazy, like, you know, greedy relatives who want to sabotage, you know, the beneficiaries, the intended beneficiaries' ability to collect the principal, they're really not going to be able to do that. You know, just like stuff like that. And pretty much anybody can download these documents. You know, it varies by state. Like what's required in procedural terms, but it doesn't vary dramatically. You know, so I mean, anybody, you spend a couple days in the law library, kind of like boning up on the vocabulary that you know, would be kind of unfamiliar to a layperson. And you can download everything you need and basically execute it yourself. I mean, just have witnesses and get it notarized. I realize not everybody's comfortable doing that, but it's like, okay, well, in that case, you know, have somebody you can trust who has, you know, the knowledge to do so, you know, assist you with it. Of which in our faction, there's plenty of people with legal background, and you know, the one of the reasons I'm always banding about social capital and you know, this invisible metropolis we're building, is that well, for circumstances like this, you know, it's like I want to execute a testamentary trust, you know, but I you know, I'm not comfortable with the process and what have you, and plus, you know, I don't really want to talk to a stranger about my money and my estate and stuff. It's like, well, you know, keep it within like our faction, you know. That's just that is kind of like tangential, but it plays into what we're talking about in terms of, you know, maintaining wealth across generations and things, and you know, the trust that's intrinsic to, you know, retaining people who can assist in that process. But that's just something that jumps out at me because like I'm constantly running across otherwise like educated people, you know, from, you know, pretty solid families, you know, and like I'm getting pretty old, so not a lot of people whose parents die. I'm not being crass. I mean, I just do, okay, because that's the age I'm at. And I'm kind of shocked at the number of people where it's, you know, they call me like, you know, crying. You know, some like lady friend of mine calls me crying and saying like, you know, dad died and you know he died intestate. I don't know what to do. Like this happens like all the time, and I started realizing like what a problem it is. So beyond my academic interest in such things, I realized, well, in practical terms, I don't want this to happen to anybody, you know, among our people. So I want to try and advise people in that regard the best I can, and kind of make the process less mysterious and ominous seeming. And also, there's a I don't want to sound like I'm preaching like it's Sunday morning or something or sound corny, but you know, there's an aspect, there's a metaphysical aspect to it too, and like an existential one, like you know, you coming to being okay with the fact you're gonna die. You know, like when I started, like it, you know, taking on this exercise of planning for, you know, getting your affairs in order after you're gone, and acknowledging that directly and owning it, as it were. You know, I think that's an important step in, you know, people coming to terms with death, and doing so not in just like a fatalistic, resigned way, like in actually a, you know, a positive way. You know, the world will move on after I'm gone, and I will continue to contribute to that and to my lineage and to my people's fortunes, you know, from like perennially, you know, like as part of this, you know, blood community um that endures. So I mean, I think that, you know, there's like a spiritual practice element to it as well that has benefit. You know, I'm not saying people need to, you know, spend the Thanksgiving weekend, you know, researching, you know, testamentary trusts and contemplating like how things are going to be in their family when they're dead. I mean, but I think it's clear what I'm getting at. So
So
yeah, go
there's
ahead.
something about this that this is what I think is interesting. Obviously, there's the pure mechanics of it. You know, this is something you should do as part of being kind of a functional member of society. But on the other end, it's sort of this question of, well, what is the purpose of wealth and what is the purpose of your assets? Because, you know, I've worked in this industry. I have friends who've worked in healthcare, and from those two perspectives, you sort of see that the way that the current system is designed, it is to leave you poor or indebted after you're dead. You know, I think that recently an article came out that claimed that the average nursing home runs about $105,000 a year. You know, if you look at end of life care, if you look at the kind of, you know, exorbitant medical costs, it is very clear that, you know, if you go along with the sort of best practices, the current wisdom on the topic, any wealth you have gained over the course of your life will be, gotten rid of.
Well,
It
that's
will be
basically
dispersed.
that's basically the Provident model, without exaggeration. A lot of these like nursing homes, especially like the higher end ones, they basically negotiate with the family, like basically like, what have you got? Literally, like, okay, we'll take what you have. We'll take basically the entirety of the patient or the resident's estate, and I call it even basically, like it's that much like above board, like there's not some like ledger domain here where it's, like, I mean, there's people do get taken advantage of too, but it's shocking to me that people they're just willing to do that. Now, the rebuttal what I get from like normies and stuff, and even people should know better. They're like, well, how do you suggest, like you care for your elderly parents? It's like, well, my race cared for their elderly for the past 40,000 years without incinerating incinerating the commonwealth. Um, Plus, I mean, who the hell wants to? I'm not talking about like hospice care where somebody's like literally on their way out and they need to be made comfortable, like, before as they get ready to cross the river. These like nursing homes that are basically just like old people hotels, like even the ones that have pretty luxurious accoutrements, like who the hell wants to live there? It's like you're around a bunch of old people exactly your age, or like a bunch of like kind of condescending staff members like treat you like you're in a daycare center. And then I mean, like, why? Where's the dignity in that? And like, how's that enjoyable? And it's also, you just like find a way, man. Like you find a way to care for your elderly relatives. I know half a dozen guys who are homeschooling their kids, and like people to me claim like, oh, you have no choice but to send your kid to public school. It's like, really, man? Like the guys that know homeschool their kids aren't rich, they're just making it work. Like maybe that means that you don't, take like 3 vacations a year. You don't take like a Disney World vacation, and like a European vacation and like a Vegas vacation just for the parents, every year. And you don't, you know, you don't have like, you don't own 4 vehicles for a family of, like, 3 people. Maybe it means you don't live in like, as prestigious a zip code, that'll win you clout on Instagram or something. But I mean, it's like this idea that like these things are totally out of reach or something, except for quote unquote rich people. Like that's nonsense. Like in fact, like to your point, it's what's exorbitant is the cost of the alternative is signing away the entirety of the soon to be or not so soon to be decedent's estate, to some managed care facility. Like it's crazy.
Well, and I think that brings up another conversation, which is kind of what is the purpose and nature of wealth and money? Because I've been kind of wrestling with this concept of usury, right? Which is this idea of, in kind of Dante's sense, the sterile, media of money creating more money. Dante infamously put, the sodomites and the users in the same circle of hell. And like, fair enough. Obviously, I understand the need for capital. I understand the need for central banking. I'm not some type of, pure reactionary on those terms. But we do have to kind of come to terms with the fact that the very nature of money in itself has changed. We are no longer dealing with the same sort of thing. And so when you have one, the media in itself has changed, and then another, that people's attitudes towards money, which is essentially that like my money and my wealth exists exclusively for me to have, as many pleasurable experiences as possible. It sort of muddies the water. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on the topic?
At the end of the day, money is a utility, and that's really all it is. Like it's, I mean, the essence of it is fungibility. You know, um, and viewing it as like viewing money as wealth, viewing money as wealth in and of itself is very, very strange, and also self-defeating. And I mean, the famous example is the Spanish Empire by far was wealthier than any other empire on earth at its zenith. Before immediately before they were devastated by the Royal Navy, which kind of set their irreversible decline in motion at pace. But I mean, what do you have? It's like, okay, so you warehoused, gold, like, to a degree, like that was unthinkable before, essentially you conquered the new world. Like, so what are you going to do with that gold? Like, you can't build an army out of gold, like you can't drop a bunch of gold, on these natives, that you lord over, in Mesoamerica, and suddenly they'll transform into, Saxon siege engine builders. I mean, it's this idea that like money, like that money equals wealth. That's one of the ways that usurious systems sort of pervert people's conceptual horizon. And that's also, but on the other hand, too, I don't want to take this too far afield, but that's one of the things that like the Von Misesians are wrong about too. Like this idea that like gold is sound money and fiat currency isn't. Gold is a shiny rock. Gold is not anymore. It's not any more sound in and of itself than a piece of cotton paper with green ink. Because again, there's not any inherent value to money. It's a utility. It's like a sewer system or an electricity grid. The problem is, I mean, it depends on where you want to. And I mean, also too, like in my own, in bring it back to the conversation at hand. I don't want people to get the impression that I'm suggesting that in terms of personal finance, like wealth is money either, because like that's not the case. Like you've got to use money wisely. As I say, use, because that's exactly what it is. It's a utility. But this idea that wealth kind of begins and ends individually or at scale, with how much money you can collect and how you can make it work for you. That's a very incomplete picture, and unfortunately, that's part of the corruption of usury is that it creates these parameters of how people contemplate wealth. I mean, that's sort of like the short answer.
Well, and it speaks to sort of a shortcoming of liberal, and I use that word intentionally, liberal morality, right? That the only thing that determines morality is direct care or harm. The idea, well, I can't immediately see someone being physically harmed by this, therefore it's not wrong. Like when you and I spoke on the phone about this a few weeks ago, you mentioned that this is sort of analogous to, something like gambling, right? That gambling, you can't necessarily draw a straight line between like, oh, we allowed a casino and now there's n+1 number of, murders or rapes. But there is a sense that the degradation of social fabric, the degradation of currency is a genuine and real problem. And I think that should be very clear to anyone who's paying attention.
Oh yeah, very much so. Well, it's also too, there's got to be the problem when at scale, at least, when financial institutions and when financial processes kind of become the core of the national economy. So we can even speak of national economies anymore, but you understand what I mean. That's highly corrupting, because it basically it's that mode of thinking writ large. And one of the reasons why I cite Schumpeter so much is kind of like my go-to economist, is because he was really something of a political philosopher, but also like an economic sociologist, and he understood that if you want to glean meaningful data from business cycles, you basically need to look at like a 500. You basically need to look at like a 500 year like increment. Okay, so he basically said that like virtually everybody who's trying to analyze market trends, beginning with like the Great Depression or something, is on a fool's errand. But his whole point was that the driving engine of wealth creation, the driving engine of capitalism, if you will, isn't just innovation. There's got a punctuated equilibrium to it, and there's there's a um there's a rare subset of the population that's willing to dedicate themselves, to like those processes to like bring them into reality. Okay, Elon Musk is one of those guys. I know people like bash him a lot, which I frankly I don't understand. So I think he's a great man, whatever his eccentricities and kind of obnoxious habits may be. But I'm not saying Elon Musk is like like the second coming of Christ or something, but he's willing to burn huge amounts of capital to like build a viable rocket that can hold 100 people and presumably, reach astronomical objects like Mars. Okay. Most people just aren't going to do that. Okay. You've got to create conditions whereby that kind of thing is rewarded um at scale. And if you only like systemic reward for those kinds of sacrifices or for those kinds of endeavors is the possibility of making even more money that that's that that doesn't work. I mean, that's one of the reasons why capitalism doesn't like take in places like Russia. Okay. Like when you set up like when you basically financialize the Russian system. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of malfeasance there, and the transition from a command economy to a basically normal kind of like mixed 21st century economy. I mean, that had profoundly traumatic effects too. But like even aside from that, in a place like Russia, in a place like Turkey, in a place like China, you know, if you create that market system that's supposed to have built-in rewards of the sort that I'm talking about, those rewards don't exist. All that emerges is the opportunity to collect more money, and then people find ways to manipulate the system to erect barriers to entry, to protect their own assets in ways that constitute monopoly and things like that. But you just don't have those innovators, okay? Or if you do, like they're so beaten down by a kind of wider milieu that has contempt for such persons, or that just refuses to abide like what they bring to the table in systemic terms, because it'll upset the boat upon which the proverbial golden goose is situated, and it may no longer bear gold after that. I realize there was a lot there, but
Well, it's interesting because one of the things that I've sort of been unconvinced of, generally speaking, because you mentioned, that capitalism is never really stuck in Russia, is that, capitalism, and I would sort of argue that there's a sense to which like the colonialists are sort of right about this, is inherently, Western and Northern European, and when it goes somewhere else, it sort of changes. It has to. Because when you look at places like Korea or Japan, obviously from one perspective, they're a capitalist country, right? But they do it differently than we do. They sort of have this kind of clan family system to these like large conglomerates it's sort of alien to the West. When the Japanese markets crashed in the 90s, right? It was kind of incomprehensible from the outside looking in because it didn't crash for the reasons that our markets would have crashed. It crashed effectively because of this incredibly complicated network of social relationships where no one wanted to embarrass anyone else by essentially like calling them out on flagrant falsehood. Where in the US that wouldn't last a week.
No, it wouldn't. Well, it's also too, it's just like I said, like the Japan's a rare case where there is that like population of innovators. I think that's why like some form of capitalism did take roots. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Like it doesn't. What's also like Japan's not like a democracy. Like it's like not. Yeah, these things don't. I mean, it's like the ideological impetus for euphemizing these things aside. these things don't translate to the Orient in any meaningful way. But it that's the and there's just there is a moral dimension. I mean, aside from the fact that it's morally deformed to enslave people to debt on grounds that they've been saddled with they've been saddled with a principle by which the interest increases exponentially. So by design, one can never service the debt and be free of it. But beyond that, a lot of the competency crisis, in my opinion, derives from the fact that a financialized economy, it just doesn't produce competent people. Look, because even like your talented 10th, they're the kinds of people who are very good systemic analysts. They're the kinds of people who've got like good hustle in some basic sense, because to make it on Wall Street you have to. But they're not the kinds of guys who can like design like an F-22. They're not the kinds of guys who can like build a better microchip. They're not the kinds of guys who can who can find a way to comply with the Byzantine environmental protection codes, all and sundry. And drop an electric motor in a car, but have that car still perform like as well as an internal combustion engine. Like those people just like stop existing, in an economy based on trading stock certificates and and monetizing debt, through these kinds of hybrid financial instruments that are then traded on the open market. Like it doesn't and that's something that's not like that's something that's not like bandied about enough. The reason kind of like the Hamiltonian and Frederick List view, it wasn't just a view that was tailored with an eye to high protectionism, and that kind of viewed economic activity as intrinsically political, and as a way of protecting both nascent and established national industry from competition, through a tariff regime. But it was also, it understood that you need to have an economy that is potentially self-contained, not in like autarkic ways, but in the fact that there's the human capital as well as the material resources to produce essentially everything that you need if such conditions arise. This knowledge is maintained over generations, and once it's gone, it's gone. Like I was talking to my dad about this the other day, and I feel very strongly. I mean, it's incredible to me, and they also expose themselves what they actually are. How the green movement hates nuclear energy when in fact that's the only green energy. Like Jerry Pournelle wrote a lot about this, but it's literally impossible. It's de facto impossible to build a nuclear reactor in the United States today. Like you could never get bonded. You could never overcome the red tape. Like it just would not be possible. But like if it were, like even if let's say like Elon Musk or a guy like him, somehow he like greased enough palms, he overcame all of these obstacles. He was able to like buy off, enough congressmen and senators to get behind the effort. I don't think America could build a nuclear reactor anymore. They don't have the engineers. They don't have the. They don't have the. They don't have the experts. Who know like how to minimize breaches in like whatever houses the core. They don't. They don't have people who anymore can calculate. Like where is a safe place to, put the damn thing, like owing to plate tectonic nuances and things like that. They just don't exist, like in my opinion. And their rebuttal is going to be like, well, you're not a scientist, you don't know shit, blah blah blah. I have a PhD in in physics. It's like, okay, that's great, man, but that's not what I'm talking about.
Well,
It's
and
just,
it's something that, and look, like I've said, I'm not one of these, hard money types, but there is an argument that basically runs, that inflation as a force is kind of it's inherently destructive to that kind of engine of progress you're talking about, because in a world of relatively finite capital, right, your ability to enrich yourself is kind of limited. Those kind of financial devices depend on there being an ever increasing amount of dollars in the world.
that's true.
Libertarians will go on and on about the fractional reserve banking system, but the problem is this both creates an ability and also a need. Because when you have this kind of decay built into every dollar, every unit of wealth, in order to not lose, right, in order to simply not have your money turn into dust, kind of under your mattress, well, you have to start to wager. You have to start to inject your money into the market, as it's called. And so this has created kind of a push and pull, and also made it comparatively less valuable to innovate, right? Because that's a risky endeavor. And if you can kind of bet, safe money is currently, you can get a CD right now for 5.5%, 6%.
Yeah,
Obviously, that's because inflation is high. But that essentially means just by doing nothing, you will beat inflation. And compared to that, like you and I both know the numbers on, entrepreneurship, on making something. Even all, like, you're right, there is an immense regulatory burden that prevents people from doing that. But it's also just not the best move. It's not where the smart money, quote unquote, is going.
No, there's an easier way to skin a cat, proverbially. Yeah, no, all those things are true. I mean, that's kind of the weak points of at scale and in kind of individual capacities of the global system as it is. But at the same time, there are benefits, not in absolute terms. I mean, yeah, no, in absolute terms, like the common man can access money in a way that he couldn't before. I've made the point to people a lot because people are always asking, like, why isn't there a mafia anymore? It's not just, I mean, one of the big reasons for that is because, like, now pretty much even a bum can get like a line of unsecured credit. Like, that didn't, pretty much nobody could get credit unless you were genuinely wealthy, and then, only when secured by collateral. Like, this idea of you can just get a credit card if you're, just some guy, who makes like $40,000 a year, like working at like the Nextel store. Like, that was unthinkable even like 40 years ago. Okay, so I mean, yeah, I realize that, like, e-credit on demand is part of like the usurious system, but you can use that to your advantage, and if you do so smartly and don't rely on it, people like me are able to get by and get established by doing things like creating content brands and engaging in partisan activity without having to insinuate ourselves into you know like a day job. And that also means, like, nobody in America is actually starving. Like, there's not like actual poor people in America, like in the way that like people talk about it. Like, I made that point to people a lot too. Okay, and like a lot of that is America's still like existing on kind of like wealth generated in decades past, but it's the system does pay dividends um in in certain ways at scale. Then that can't be denied. But at the same time too, I mean, it's like that kind of thing would probably be happening anyway. But the system that was created after Bretton Woods basically made that possible, like, in part. I'm not talking about like the entirety of the economic system. I'm talking about like I'm talking about specifically like monetary policy and the ability of people to quite literally like access money. Um, it's complicated, but yeah, Yeah, I don't disagree with you at all.
And I guess that the reason in all of this that this matters, right, is that there's sort of a well-worn path of, and a lot of the elite theory people will talk about this with regards to expertise, right? That essentially the best practices of any one industry, right, whether that be law or your financial advisor, your banker, anyone, will lead you down a series of defensible short-term decisions at the cost of building generational and civilizational wealth. And it's always interesting to me because you see these, and they're sort of artifacts of another time, kind of like 70s, 60s style liberals who get all upset about the fact, that we haven't fully abolished inheritance. The estate tax should be 100%. Every generation should be a true, blank slate. And if you know that that's wrong, you realize that, humans are not self-created, but you spend your money like that's true, and you haven't really, I guess, internalized that. And so obviously, money, the economy isn't everything, but there's something to be said for the fact that, like, there's a difference between stated and revealed preference, and you can say whatever you want, but if your money speaks something else, it's I'll put it this way, I'm not convinced.
Yeah, no, 100%. The thing, well, part of the problem too is that a lot of these things, a lot of the features that a lot of the deleterious things like people attribute to capitalism, quote capitalism, these are the effects of their social engineering endeavors, that were very much tailored, toward to accomplish that outcome. Or I mean, there's secondary effects that, yeah, well, very real and well, very harmful, would be somewhat mitigated if measures were taken, so as to mitigate them. Like when I hear like, oh, capitalism's bad because it means, men and women have to compete against each other in the workforce and everyone's kid goes to daycare. I'm like, this is who? Like that doesn't make any sense. That's not some like axiomatic outcome, of of a of a manufacturing or post-industrial, financially driven economy. It's I think more I think what you're driving at, and I think Pete Canones raises this a lot. He's a smart guy too. There's a when you extricate man, not just from his own labor, but you extricate, like value from that labor, so like even people who are being like overly worked, such that, they don't have time to spend with their families or to pursue, creative endeavors that, allow them to, kind of develop as complete people psychically. If there's no real relationship between like what they're being paid and how they're being paid, and you know, these labors that they're involved in day to day to survive, that's like beyond like demoralizing. Like it's almost like being a prisoner or something. And I'm not even saying I'm not trying melodramatic. I'm not even resort to shrill hyperbole. And I don't even think people consciously like interpret it that way. But you know, um, there's a huge difference between a guy who, let's say, in the 19 teens, like worked as a carpenter in some mid-sized town, and like built things for people, and a guy who, from the 1990s to today, like goes around like selling people insurance, or a guy who, works as a programmer, or like even a guy with like a kind of a high level, high paid job, like a guy who's like a quant, you know, um, it works in some kind of financial services capacity, like what's the guy getting out of that? And like even like what he's paid. It's like, okay, everybody likes getting money in their hand because you can kind of like a little rush from that, but it's not even like there's even that's kind of like arbitrary. Like it's not that there's like some axiomatic um relationship, between like him getting an endorphin rush and getting paid money because like he advised JP Morgan to do the right thing, like on this merger deal or whatever. It's not like that's different than like building somebody a cuckoo clock from the Black Forest and having them admire it and be like, this is such a timeless thing and it's lovely, and you're great, and like the soul of our people like is being, is being preserved in this cuckoo clock, where these like burbs pop out. Um I know it sounds
Well,
like I'm being
it's
silly, but I'm actually not.
no. And this is the thing that is sort of lost in, cross, like kind of cross generational conversation, right? Because honestly, I think everything would be all right if we could just have baby boomers admit that they had it kind of easy, that they had certain advantages that other people didn't, but they refuse to, they seem to be going to their grave, implying that they had it, tougher than anyone else and, came out the other side fine. But there is something for the fact that, and I think that this is why a lot of people, and I mean, you saw it with your generation with slacker culture, and you see it kind of increase more and more, that for people, especially people who are not clients of the regime, who have no kind of ready-made position to drop into, a lot of people are just saying like, well, fine, I'll live in the pod. Like I won't starve. You
Yeah,
can't really,
exactly.
I can live a bad life, but I won't live you know, a, an immiserated one. I'll probably, if anything, be overweight. And compare that to, okay, like you can work something that is kind of non-human, work a job that's probably more suited for one of these like LLMs or AIs, whatever you want to say it.
No, it's what's I was about to get to that point. I mean, one of the things um something that's not really being talked about, it's really peculiar, like all these system media, whether you're talking about the Wall Street Journal or NPR, like now they're like obsessed with AI. They don't really know what AI is, so they misstate the essential characteristics of it. But it's like 40 years out of date that they're just now kind of like learning about the implications of these things. But related relatedly, the abolition of labor is already well underway, and that's going to be a real crisis in some ways sociologically. you know um I make the point to people in 30 years, like there's not going to be truck drivers anymore. You're going to have unmanned trucks. You're going to have unmanned over the road trucking. um it's either going to be a guy piloting 10 drone trucks from some like remote location, or you're going to have just like, robot trucks, going in a pre-programmed route, like along, like a designated access lane, like separate from, like the normal traffic lanes. So bam, like no more truck drivers. You're not going to have like, railroad engineers anymore. You're not going to have, like, it's, and that's when I go to there's this McDonald's downtown in the Loop, and I used to go there for coffee. Like nobody works in there anymore. There's like a dozen kiosks. You put in your order and you pay for it. Then there's like some cooks in the back, and there's like this one lady just kind of like making sure everything like runs okay, who like gets your food and then like hands it to you. Okay, I mean like it's the fact, like the big question is like not just like what's the regime going to do when there's just like not labor anymore, outside of very specific sectors. But it's also like how's that going to like impact people, where it's like, it's like, okay, so the regime resorts to like universal basic income or something. It's like, what, I mean, you think money's like devalued now, like people are just gonna look at it as like, as like survival coupons that like the government gives you so that you don't like die. I mean, that's really um that's gonna create real social pathologies. Like, frankly, I think it's the only way the regime is going to survive that crisis over time. There's going to be some kind of universal basic income. It's pointless for people to argue about whether they like that or not, because that's it's a fact. Okay, but I think that's kind of the next big like paradigm shift relating to like money, labor, how people consider value therein as relates to these things. Like, forgive me if I was jumping around too much in this conversation.
No, not at all. And it is sort of, much like, you've made the argument before that, cities are in kind of the current sense, they're sort of an adaptation for an earlier time. They're worker barracks for
100%.
an industrialized economy. We're sort of doing something similar with money, and maybe we're seeing a transition now, but where we still, and Bretton Woods was an update of the system, but we're still essentially working on 50, 60-year-old financial technology. And like you've said, quite simply, we do not have the same sort of economy.
Well, it's also
you and I can bemoan that fact, but the number of people who actually do real things is vanishingly small. And I mean, I don't want to go on this hobby horse, but the fact that in the face of that, we are importing effectively an infinite number of low-skilled laborers. It boggles the mind.
Well, it's also, to your point about technology, something like the crash of '87 could never happen again, because that basically happened because there was always, like when the trading floor closed, like in Europe, the fastest mode of transmission was telex at that time. So there was always there was never true situational awareness, like up to the minute. And because of that, it would lead to panics where everybody, would scramble, based on speculation, to get their sales in or whatever, before trading closed. And if they were going on off of bad data sets, or if they were misreading indicators, it could lead to like real disasters. Like that, what the Great Depression happened for different reasons, but something like the crash of '87 couldn't happen anymore. Because, and that's one of the reasons why like the stock market's been kind of rubberized. Like stocks are kind of overstated these days as I mean, they're a decent basic indicator for like the state of the market, but it's not the stock market is not what it was, 20 and 30 years ago in terms of its structural significance. But the point is, obviously it does remain, a major factor. And yeah, you literally have like to the second, situational awareness of, stocks globally, and that elimination of uncertainty means that you're going to have a basic stability that was not possible before. That's why I disagree with people when they claim that there's going to be this like punctuated crisis that brings down the economic structure. That's not going to happen. A political event of that sort is conceivable and maybe even probable. There's not going to be an economic event of that sort, for the reasons I just outlined. But yeah, it's there's a lot there. Like again, forgive me if I'm like kind of being scatterbrained. You're giving me a lot to think about.
Oh, no worries. So Thomas, I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to head out. Like I said, I have to hit the road for Thanksgiving. But if people want to find your work, what's a good way for them to do that?
You can always find me on my website. It's Thomas777.com. Number 7, HMAS777.com. I'm on X at capital REAL _ number 7, HMAS777. My Substack is pretty active. I got set back about a month on my workflow because I was sick. Like, as you can hear, like, I'm still not 100%. But I'm imminently dropping season 2 of the podcast. There's a whole lot of medium and longer form like stuff on there. We got a pretty active chat on there. It's real Thomas777.substack.com. I got good stuff in the can. Trust me. Thanks for being patient. As the subscribers know, I got huge love for them. But it's been a slow process, but it's coming.
Well, I'm definitely looking forward to Mind Phaser season 2. As far as my stuff, you guys can find me on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere you listen to podcasts. If you want to support the show more directly, check out my sponsor, Axios. Really been doing some good work there. And again, Thomas, thank you so much. I appreciate it, man.
Thank you, buddy.
And everyone at home, keep your head up. Light can't last forever. Good night.